Hello there, it's Susie Walker from Psychologies magazine, and here I am with a wonderful kindness czar, Dr. David Hamilton. So lovely to see you. So excited to be talking to you today. Dr. David,
Me too.
I've just been saying I've known you for over 10 years. You've written books like How the Mind Can Heal the Body, Why Kindness is Good for You, which is one of my favorites. And I've seen you do numerous talks about mental health and kindness. So I thought you were the perfect person to kind of round off our mental health week this week. So lovely to see you.
And you too, Susie. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, lovely to see you. So tell me a little bit about what is the connection between kindness and our mental health?
Well, actually, there's lots of research on this, and basically, kindness boosts mental health. I call it one of the side effects of kindness. And the way that it does it, I mean, for example, lots of studies will compare people asked to go out and do a bunch of acts of kindness over a day or a week or a month or so, and their happiness levels will be compared against people who are just asked to be normal. And what all of these studies show is exactly the same thing. Those who do the acts of kindness experience a net gain in happiness. But even more than that, longer term studies show that consistent kindness is actually protective against depression. And the way it kind of works, we used to assume it was just like you do something kind and it kind of feels nice, maybe fiddles around with brain chemistry, but in actual fact, it goes a lot further than that. Brain imaging scans show us now that consistent kindness actually changes the structure of the brain. I mean, if I was to exercise a muscle, like my bicep, for example, then two things would happen. The muscle would become firmer, and then it would become larger. Now, in the brain, if you work out a region of the brain, you get exactly the same thing. But neuroscientists don't call it muscle growth, they call it neuroplasticity, but it's the same idea. Now, most people have practiced mindfulness, they're aware of it. If I breathe, which I hope most people are doing, it's breathing. Yeah. But if I breathe and then notice that I'm breathing, then I'm becoming mindful of the fact that I'm breathing. And what I do there is I'm working out the noticing part of the brain, i.e. the mindfulness region, which is this part above your forehead and behind the orbits of the eyes.
Yes.
But let's say, instead of doing mindfulness, I did kindfulness. So I then had some kind thoughts and sentiments for people. Then what happens is I work out this whole region of the brain, but slightly biased to the left-hand side. And what that actually means, it's like going to the gym and working out slightly more on the left-hand side than the right. What that actually means is the left-hand side of this frontal region of the brain is the region associated with happiness and with joy and with positive emotion and with resilience even in the face of challenging, stressful situations. So the fact that kindness improves happiness in the long term and is protective against depression in the long term is because the consistency of the feelings cause physical changes to the structure of the brain, like working out a muscle.
I mean, isn't that amazing? I mean, neuroplasticity, I always find incredible, and I find it so encouraging that we can literally change the functioning of our brain, but also the structure of our brain by thinking.
Absolutely.
That to me is so incredible.
It blows me away.
Yeah, I know it is. It's so incredible we can do that, and I love that idea because it's very empowering. Because it's the idea that the brain was fixed in form, and you were what you were born, and this idea that we can change that just by changing and thinking our thoughts is amazing. But I love this idea of using kindness to do that. But what I want to ask you, a very challenging question here, is what if you don't feel very kind? I mean, if you've had a really bad day and you're not feeling particularly kind, how can you make the leap? You know what I mean? So, some people get kind of really stuck in, and even when we know this stuff, sometimes you can feel a little bit unkind or you feel grumpy. How can you make the leap from being unkind to kind? What are the mechanisms to get that place? Because I think sometimes when you're struggling with your mental health, you are not at your best self. You can feel anxious, or miserable, you can depress. So how do we find a way through to kindness?
Susie, I think the first thing we have to do is turn it inwards on ourselves and practice self-kindness.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes a lack of self-kindness, and part of that is self-compassion, can obscure our natural responses to things. I mean, there's two ways we can practice self-kindness. First, in the things that we do for ourselves, the practical things that we do, like, treating ourselves or taking some time out, nice warm bath, a shower, going for a walk, reading a book, or even specifically setting aside time for ourselves, eating better, exercising better, even learning to say no is an act of kindness, especially if we say yes too often, to the extent that we spread ourselves so thin that we end up feeling overwhelmed or stressed. So these are things that we can do, actually things that we can do to practice self-kindness. The other way to practice self-kindness is in how we feel about ourselves. And a large part of that is in the things that we say to ourselves about ourselves. And this is when you can actually start using particular practices. The practice that, when I referred earlier to changing the structure of the brain with a bias to the left-hand side, that was actually research on the Tibetan Buddhist loving kindness meditation. And this helps so much in building that sense of self-compassion and self-kindness, because what we do is we start with ourselves and we say, may I be happy, may I be well, may I be safe, may I be at peace. And we can say that, normally you say it 3 times, but I find when I need to work on self-kindness, I might do that 20 times or 30 times. Yeah. May I be happy, may I be well, may I be safe, may I be at peace. And then you extend that sentiment and those words to other people, loved ones, people close to you, even people at your work, colleagues, even people we have difficulty with. And for each in turn, may you be happy, well, safe, and at peace. And that helps to build a sense of self-compassion for ourselves. Another way to do it is, I call it an inner Buddha exercise, where you take, this is particularly good if you're one of these people, like I can be at times, where you're overly self-critical and often feel disappointed in ourselves, sometimes disappointed in ourselves for not being kind. And so I call this the inner Buddha. And you take 3 coloured pens, and these represent 3 different portions of yourself. So when you're being disappointed in yourself or self-critical, you could call that the critic portion of yourself. So you take a pen and you write down whatever the critic is saying, or whatever the sentiment is, in whichever colourful language you use for yourself. And then, whenever that's finished, you take the pen, a different colour pen, and you respond as the wounded part of yourself, that part of you that feels wounded and hurt by what the critic is implying. And you might respond from the wounded portion, and then allow them to dialogue. And whenever you feel the time is right, you introduce the voice of your inner Buddha, which is the deepest, wisest, most compassionate portion of yourself, and allow the inner Buddha to address both portions. So it might say to the critic, I understand how you feel, and I know that you're being critical because you just see so much potential and you're just trying to help, but maybe we could work better together with a little bit more compassion. But please know that I understand you. And then the Buddha then addresses the wounded portion and says, you know what, I love you so much, and I've got you, and I care for you, and I'm so sorry that you're feeling this way. I know that you're trying the best you can. And even, we don't punish a child for falling down when the child is learning to walk. Yeah. In my eyes, you're still a child. And allow this dialogue to go on between the 3, finishing on the Buddha. And what happens is we learn to stop listening to the critical voice, which isn't normal anyway. Children are not born as critics, self-critics. We learn it. Yeah. So what this exercise does is it teaches you to learn to the deeper, wiser voice, to listen to the deepest, wisest part of yourself. And that exercise, in concert with the loving kindness meditation, I find is a really good tonic for self-compassion. And what that does is it takes away a lot of the stuff that obscures a person's natural tendency for kindness. So it's almost like, if you want to be kind to people out there, sometimes we have to go within. We have to turn it around to ourselves and service our own spiritual needs and practical needs. That gives us more energy then and presence of mind to be able to then be kind to other people. It's like you go in first before you can go out.
And I mean, I love what you're saying, because, you know, in any therapeutic model, or the ones that I've done anyway, it's about acknowledging that part of you and listening to that part, rather than saying to the critic, shut up, go away. But you're acknowledging it, you're listening to it, and you're bringing care and compassion to those parts. And also acknowledging that it's just a part of you, it's not all of you. So there might be this grumpy inner critic that goes, so, but to kind of wrap that part in love and compassion, even that act,
absolutely,
that relationship, that relational thing that's happening with self, and then also being, as you say, being able to contact that part of yourself, that part of self, the Buddha self, whatever you want to call it, the higher self. The more, I believe, that's in my belief system, that we can do that, the more happy we'll be, all of those things. But it's that exercise is so excellent, Dave, because it's a very practical way with 3 pens of being able to do that quickly and immediately. So, okay, so let's say we've connected with ourselves, being kind to ourselves, and then we're going to go out. Why is kindness to other people, why does that help our mental health?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the kindness to other people gives us immediate feedback. I mean, that's where I was talking about how it boosts happiness and is protective against depression. It's because of how it makes you feel. And in some ways, it's the opposite of stress. It's the exact opposite. When a person feels stress, it's not the situation, but it's how you feel in the situation, because 2 people can be in the same situation. One person can feel stressed about it. Another person might not feel stressed, but it's the feelings of stress. The person feeling stressed will generate stress hormones in the brain and body, like adrenaline and cortisol. But the other person in the same situation, not feeling stressed, will have very little levels of adrenaline and cortisol. So the levels of stress hormones are really down to how we feel in a certain situation. When we be kind, we don't produce stress hormones because we're not feeling stressed. We produce kindness hormones. I call them kindness hormones to draw that comparison between the way that they're formed and the way stress hormones are formed, because stress hormones are formed because of how you feel. So when we be kind, kindness hormones are also produced by how we feel. But the way that they work goes in the opposite direction. So whatever stress does, even stress can cause us difficulties with mental health. Kindness hormones, because of how they work, have the opposite effect. Not only in our mental health, but even to the immune system. We know that stress hormones can dampen local immune response, but kindness hormones can elevate the immune response. We know that stress can increase blood pressure. Kindness hormones decrease blood pressure. So a lot of if you take it down to the chemical level, a lot of the opposite effects of stress and the boosts to mental health are actually related to the kindness hormone. You could call them biological products of how kindness feels. And that's what they are. They're biological products, hormones produced because of how kindness feels, which means you get a similar effect from being kind to others as you do from receiving kindness. And even when you witness kindness, when you even see an uplifting video on social media, something that demonstrates the moral fiber, and it moves you, and that produces kindness hormones as well. So even just witnessing nice things, and I'm not talking about positive things, but nice things that actually move you because of the demonstration of kindness, compassion, or some other aspect of moral fiber. And these generate the kindness hormone as well, boosting mental health because of the way they integrate into the brain, but also your immune system and your cardiovascular system.
So is that why kindness is contagious?
Sorry,
is that why kindness is contagious? Kindness is contagious. So you've been teaching us. Is that why? Because when we see someone doing that, it makes us feel good, and then we go on and we're kind to other people because we're in that soft place.
That's exactly right, Susie. That's exactly why kindness is contagious. Kindness is contagious because of how it feels. So if you do something kind for someone, or even if that person witnesses someone else being kind, based on research at Harvard and Yale, they found that kindness ripples out at 3 stages called 3 social steps. In other words, if you be kind to someone, or that person witnesses an act of kindness, because of how that person feels, they will likely be kind or kinder to someone else. But that person, because of how they feel, will be kind or kinder to someone else. And how that person feels, they will be kind or kinder to someone else. That's 3 stages. But here's where it gets really cool. Because, you know, coronavirus, at its peak, at its height, it had an R number of 2.5. Now, R number is this reproducibility rate. What it really means is one person will infect, statistically, 2.5 people. And each of those 2.5 will infect another 2.5, so that's 6.25. And each of those 6.25 will infect another 2.5. So you've got 2.5 times 2.5 times 2.5 is 15.625. So that's about 16 people from one person. The R number for kindness is between 4 and 5, and it's closer to 5. And it varies from culture to culture. It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
And what that means, and this was actually, a version of this was measured in an experiment at Harvard and Yale. And what they found, and what happens, you be kind to someone, and because of how that person feels, they will be kind or kinder to 5 people. That's what the R number means. It's how many people are infected. 5 people. But each of those 5, Susie, will be kind or kinder to 5 more, which is 25. But each of those will be kind or kinder to another 5. So from a single act of kindness, it goes out really to 125.
Oh, wow.
If you were to follow the first person around,
yeah,
if you were to follow the person around with a wee drone, which I hope you don't do, but if you did, then what you would see is this ripple effect going out in a circular direction. And about 125, give or take a few, depends on place to place, person to person, population density. There's lots of factors. But on average, it's about 125 on average. Whereas coronavirus at 3 stages affects 16 people. Kindness affects 125. Far, far more contagious. I mean, coronavirus isn't in every household, but kindness is in every household because it's so incredibly contagious.
Oh, well, and now we have to end there because that is such a brilliant idea. So we're just about to go into the bank holiday weekend. It's the end of Mental Health Week. We've got our kindness czar himself here, Dr. David Hamilton, telling us that if we're kind, we can affect 120. Our rate for kindness is 125. So let us go out into the world, people, Psychology's audience, and go and spread some kindness. Dr. David, thank you so much for coming today and spreading this inspirational message, and for all the brilliant work that you do at Psychologies and out in the world. We love you lots. We do. Speak to you soon.
And I love you all too. Thank you so much.
Bye.
See you soon.
Bye.
Have a great day. Stay safe. And